Hey, folks, happy Friday, and welcome to another episode of Plan A Conversations. So, listen, I hope you're really enjoying our new theme music by Tubracker, this incredible mixologist that I found over in Europe. Love his work. Again, that new track is entitled Mojo. Be sure to check him out on literally all of your SoundCloud and all of your interesting music adventures. He's a really great producer. So excited he could join us for this new season 7. Last week we had Darnell Moore from Netflix. I got so much great feedback about that conversation, and so glad that you were able to indulge a little bit more and also understand what his journey towards Netflix was like and how he is this idea of someone who's an audacious dreamer. And it's something that I really have been stepping up this year, especially in the pandemic and post, the question of what is it that I want my life to be like after? And also, that's a question I know a lot of you have as well. And so, segueing to this week's conversation, one of the most, I think, interesting podcasts, and again, they're all interesting, but one of the most interesting podcasts from the vantage point of your emails and your thought processes and your DMs was when I interviewed Dr. Garrett Weatherhead about his anti-racism journey. And all of your questions, all of your thoughts came back and you were just like, I want to know more. And as he and I started to get deep into the conversation, there was one voice in particular that I just said, I want to understand a little bit more about her process, her thoughts throughout it. So again, if you have not listened to Dr. Garrett Weatherhead's podcast episode, go back and listen to that before you listen to this show. But if not, I'm sure you can figure out all the conversation pieces. And so before we get into all the specificities, I want to welcome his wife, Lindsay Weatherhead, to the show. Welcome, Lindsay.
Thank you. Hi.
It's so good to have you. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thank you.
Okay, so one of the reasons why I want to talk to you, Lindsay, because as Garrett alluded to, this whole transformation period that he experienced at Western University during his PhD program, he talked about this unearthing of his life and how the scales just fell off, and also a lot of the difficulties that he admittedly said he brought home. And how you guys' life was just like upended for, a long period of time, and having to figure out what that journey would be like, not just for him, but your family unit, as a whole. And so before we get into all of those nuances of what you experience and also your own journey around this anti-racism quest, how did you and Garrett meet in the first place?
So we both played basketball at Kalamazoo College, and we just honestly were just friends first, and we're chatting, and we began dating. So yeah, nothing too crazy, but just saw each other
And so
all the time.
Okay, so how long had you guys been together at K College before you got married?
That probably was about 7 years from
Okay,
when we started dating till we got married, roughly.
all right. What year were you guys dating at K? I'm curious from my own.
2002 or 3, 2002.
Okay,
I think that's when he
yeah.
graduated.
And for you in particular, what was it about Garrett that you were interested in pursuing a relationship with him?
Well, I think that's evolved over time. But I
Right.
think initially, we both just kind of like could connect and could talk easily with each other without having to kind of, I feel like in high school and things like that, you kind of are kind of like have a preconceived like idea of who you are. And I think that was like a nice, for me, it was someone new that I, didn't have to have like my hometown or anything,
Yeah.
surrounding that into that relationship.
Okay, so there was a connection point that you guys had that kind of crystallized
Mhm,
your relationship. And
mhm.
so after K College, had he had any questions or thoughts about this whole anti-racism journey before he started Western Michigan? What was that conversation piece like for you guys?
Yeah, very minimal for us, as like
Mm,
on the forefront of the conversation, really wasn't there. When stuff would like come up in the news or something like that, it might have been a conversation. But other than that, prior to Western, very minimal conversations that we were having about the topic.
hmm. And your background in particular, what did you grow up understanding about race relations in the United States and inequalities? Like, what was that conversation like for you? Or did you have those kind of conversations at home?
Yeah. So interestingly, I'm from Ionia, which is, had 5 prisons in it. And so it was a
Oh, wow.
predominantly white, type of white and a lot of Latino, Hispanic people in our community. So that was normal for me. But yeah, I think just in general, my parents were just kind of big on just like work hard, kind of hard nosed work ethic type of thing where the conversation about race wasn't necessarily a conversation. I think more because of the community that I was in, but also with the Hispanic population being so big, like that was probably more of the conversation. But those were people that, it wasn't, it didn't seem like it was just an integrated community in that regard. So didn't
Yeah.
separated to me in any way.
Got it. So you grew up like in school with the Latinx population, going to school with various
Mhm.
ethnicities or.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, very minimal though, but I mean that was the predominant, it wasn't,
Mhm.
other, people of color typically. So
Got it. And now since you brought that up, the prison population, did you say there was 5 prisons in
mhm,
your
mhm.
what so did was there any like town conversations around who were the occupants of the prison
Yeah, I think
system? Like,
probably, leans probably a little bit more on, people being a little bit probably more racist or judgmental as far as the, working in those facilities, people, a lot of white people
mm,
working in those facilities. So definitely a separation there for sure. For sure.
okay.
Not a conversation as a kid that I remember as much, but,
Hmm.
it wasn't necessarily the conversation as much. It was like the feeling that you got, more so than
Yeah.
anything else. So it was like unspoken.
Yeah. And and so now you've transitioned to K College, and it was, as we both were aware, a very small Black population and very small people of color in general. Had you heard any instances of just like racism or just difficult conversations that people were having like outside of your uh, community?
I think at K, I think the doing those like the LACs and stuff like that kind of forced you, I think, into some of those conversations that were, maybe topics that I would have never considered, but since they were required, you show up and you're like, oh, I never really thought about that. So
Mm-hmm.
I think that was probably more eye opening, was kind of exploring some of those topics that's like, oh, it works in my schedule. So I'm going to go. I don't know anything about this. And here I am and see what it has to offer. So.
Yeah. Okay. So it's really interesting. There was, I guess, maybe pockets of things happening around you,
Mhm.
in various
Mhm.
components of your life. And now we're fast forwarding to Western Michigan University, where your husband is pursuing this PhD program.
Mhm.
And then all of a sudden, at least from his vantage point, just something shifted and changed. Walk our listeners and our viewers through what that experience was like for you at the beginning of this. Like, what did you notice? And what was your initial sort of thoughts when Garrett comes home and he seems to be a completely different person?
Yeah. So I think that was a little shocking to the system initially. I think the biggest thing though for me was like I'd work all day and come home and be like, start being like, well, you're a racist because you're white. And I'm like, I just worked for a long time today. Like I'm sorry. Like, so I think that conversation was really hard. I think Garrett came home with a lot of anger. And I think that
Mm,
that was really hard. And I didn't really understand where it was coming from. There wasn't like I didn't have the back history that he had, with his classes and things like that. So he's coming home and he's so mad about everything, it seemed like to me, to everything. Even watching TV was hard. It was like every commercial was sexist, racist, um, ageist even, and so he's like all of
Mm.
these things that his eyes were open to, but it was like anger came out first for him. So I think that was probably the hardest part.
Yeah. And so when you say anger came out, like what was those interactions like with him?
First of all, I tried to dodge them because they were, it was hard, it's like, we're watching a show and he's like, oh my gosh, that's just so racist. Like you can't say things like that. You can't do that. And I'd be like, okay, but it's a show, or, and those conversations got very hard and very heated very quickly. And I think
Mm.
it took a long time for us to kind of backpedal and talk about like systemic racism and things like that, that I think that I was never like properly educated about or
Mm.
uneducated about, so I think that that was a big part of it, was those conversations just really didn't go well because I didn't have any clue where he was coming from at all. And so,
Mm.
and coming, and I had like, no, I'm like, I haven't done the research. I haven't read anything. Like, I'm not where you're at. And so I think that was really hard, especially, we'd only been married a year when he started the program. And so that was really hard
Oh,
because I'm like,
wow.
this isn't who I married. Like, this is like, what is like the wheels are falling off here. So, where it felt like we couldn't have just normal conversations. It was, everything was centered now, right? Like, so it's like, it was centered around us. And then it turned into being centered around all of these inequities that are happening.
Yeah. And you bring up something that I think is really important for a lot of people to really get. You just said, I did not have the education. I did not have the research. It was not anything that you were taught. What do you say to other people, other couples, especially white couples who are going through, some of the similarities of what you and Garrett went through? And there's that one person's coming in and all of a sudden their eye is just completely open to this other
Mm-hmm.
world. And the other person's like, well, wait a minute, like I'm trying to catch up with you, but I don't understand it.
Mm-hmm.
How does one begin to have these conversations? What would be impactful for them?
Yeah, so I actually think I had a conversation with one of Garrett's classmates about some of this stuff, and like she was able to kind of break things down for me in a way that like
Mm.
I could actually comprehend. He was coming at me with all of the stuff, and I was like, I think I need to start like with one nugget and then kind of grow off of that. And so, for me, that was really super helpful for me to like get a grounding and a base for the information from a person of color that I could, that was like trying to help us through what we're trying to navigate. And I just wasn't able to be where Garrett was at that time. So that probably was one of the more helpful things that I did, was kind of reach out and say, okay, like what's going on here. I think is stuff in the media has kind of come out.
Mm.
Since that point, I've been able to kind of I can read all of the articles now and kind of understand more at different levels of what has been happening, historically as well as currently, and what that means, and be able to have those conversations much better now. So instead of before, I'd be like, I'd read like the headline and I wouldn't kind of understand the whole context of a situation, and kind of really diving into that for myself, to form my own opinions is
Mm.
really important.
Yeah. And at that point, did you guys have children at that point? Were you
Um, not no, we didn't initially when this all kind of happened. We didn't, and then 3 years into the program, then we had our first daughter. So,
okay?
yes.
How is that mechanics? Because I can imagine if you're having this push and pull just between you guys,
Yeah.
what was that like, now about to raise children together?
Yeah, I think that that got a little muddy. First of all,
Mm.
like probably like the first 6 months to a year of having our first child, that was really challenging because, Garrett was just always challenging with me. And here I'm like, I'm just trying to keep a human alive and fed and well and sleep when I can sleep. And so, and he wanted to have those kind of bigger conversations of how are we raising our children? What is important?
Mm.
And things like that. And honestly, at that point, I I was engaged in the conversation, but it became easier to have those conversations as she got older, and we could
Mm.
carve that out a little bit more specifically. Like he was all angry, when she's a couple months old. And I'm like, I don't know. But I think as time has progressed, it's been easier to see in the world how we want to make sure that she is well rounded and how we can expose her to different things that maybe as children we weren't exposed to, and having the conversation, So buying all the books and buying babies and, all of the things that we can just kind of start
Mhm.
at a very young age to kind of show her that, you know, well, maybe, because they are of a color, maybe they don't get treated as well. And, to have it with an honest child is a totally different conversation. She'll bring you to tears, like, because it's like kids don't want those
Mm.
injustices. And I think you're trying to unteach things that we learned, which is a lot harder than trying to teach her from a young age,
Mm.
like this is why this is important. And her just at a core belief, just wanting to feel included for herself, but also all the other children, without even thinking about the color
Yeah.
of their skin or being aware that they might be judged because of that. And her having a reaction to that, at 5 years old is
Mm.
kind of, where that conversation starts.
Yeah, and that's a really good entryway to the parenting, the educational components of these like anti-racism conversations. I get a lot of questions, especially when people are trying to figure out what their purpose in life is.
Mhm.
But one question that even came after Garrett's interview was, "Okay, great. Let's say that we're a white family, and a part of our purpose together is to teach our children, racial inequity components that's happening in the world." What would you say to white families who are just starting literally to integrate these kind of conversations into their children's lives? And a secondary question: how old do you think is the appropriate age to, just from your own experience, to start these talks?
Yeah. So honestly, these conversations, I mean, our oldest one will be like, Dad, do we have to talk about that again? Like she's very aware
Mm.
that Garrett's pushing this agenda, which is absolutely fine. But we just found a nice kids book, like kids on anti-racism book. We bought as
Mm.
many books from authors of color as we possibly can, even things that aren't just Black, like talking about other like religions and things like that. We've been
Mm.
able to integrate those into just our regular story time, that, just having those little conversations over a period of time. I think from a young age, you can start doing that. You can start having all different colored, babies that she could play with and toys. And, I think that
Hmm.
I do feel like in general that stuff is way more accessible than it used to be. And I think that parents
True.
go out and find exactly what they're looking for. But I think the conversation starts at a young age. And we even use it a lot when she's feeling sad about something, like that she feels like wasn't right.
Mm.
And kind of then twisting that around and saying, well, what do you think, how do you think your friend felt? Or, and already as soon as, they can start verbalizing that, having that conversation is important to have.
Yeah, and I think that's a really powerful response and a good way to get this conversation started. Lindsay, I'm curious to know about your own personal evolution with anti-racism. You spoke about the angriness of it all that Garrett brought home. How have you changed personally with your own views and perceptions since the beginning of that to where you are now?
Yeah, so I would say initially I was a little bit resistant to it, probably because it came at me with so much anger. So,
Mm.
not being open to that just kind of was, I feel like, me being more stubborn than anything else. But I think
Mm.
for myself, the whole journey is realizing like the untruth and the truths that are really there. And I think that
Mm.
that's probably been the biggest change for me, is just overall just making, I'm more open, I'm more aware, I'm conscious about it, I'm thinking about it. Like obviously with living with Garrett, we're having these conversations on a daily basis in some capacity. And so I do feel like my evolution kind of from where we were to where we are now, has been pretty remarkable for myself. Like I feel like I've been able kind of to be closed and just this is, just not wanting to get stuck in just this is how things are, but like evolving as a person as well. And I think that was probably that one of the harder changes for me was realizing what's true and what's not true anymore, and then making changes accordingly. So I think that that's probably been,
Yeah.
and what the hate or the prejudice that maybe I had, taking like realizing how harmful and hurtful that could be, I think was very eye opening for me. So I think that was probably one of the bigger changes for me. I think I have more love to give now, that I'm realizing, you know, that I want our home to be welcome for everyone. That's one of the things that's important to me. So, I think that's probably been part of the transformation for me. I also probably would have never engaged in the conversation when it was first happening. And now, you know, in my own, without Garrett around, you know, I can engage in these conversations with other people where before I absolutely would not have. Or I wouldn't have called
Yeah.
out if I saw something that wasn't right. I would have just like put my head down and walked away. And I think watching Garrett kind of stand up and speak out has been good for me too, because it's like I might be able to pick and choose a little bit more, but I think it is important, you know, to be able to stand up for what I believe too, which doesn't necessarily always fall with what Garrett believes, but also knowing that, you know, for years and years, this is how things were and how we can change and we can evolve. And if you're always learning and always growing and always curious, you know, that we can continue to be more available to other people. So.
And what's really interesting about this whole conversation, it seemed like there was an entryway point that maybe Garrett brought in, but you did the self-analysis and the work to take a step back and say, hey, these are some things that I want to figure out for myself and learn. It kind of reminds me, I was on study abroad. Did you go and study abroad, okay? Okay. I know you basketball players. I know you guys have different a different term.
Yes, I think my flight was supposed to leave the day we declared war on Iraq. So my parents were like, "Well, I don't really know the
Oh,
time."
that.
Yeah.
Oh my
So
gosh.
it was just kind of bad timing. So
Yeah. To say the
yeah,
least.
they just weren't sure that they should send me
Yeah.
to the other one. So
Oh my gosh.
yeah.
But I remember being on study abroad and feeling like my Spanish was just completely horrible. And then going away traveling for a couple of months, allowing it to sit and linger. And I came back and like my host family was like, who are you? You're different. But I say that all to say is I think a big part of this is allowing other people within your pod, within your cohort, to receive the information and give them a chance to process it for themselves. Would you say?
Yeah, I think that's actually the only way that true change probably happens is for someone to
Mm,
sit with it and grow with it. Garrett kind of forcing those feelings on me was never going to be something that was in my heart or how I was going to be. But me taking the time and doing some of that work on my own, or becoming more involved in the conversation, definitely allowed for that change to happen.
yeah.
Absolutely.
Did you understand his anger in terms of where it was coming from at all, or was it just a sense of this is not how I want to be engaged in this kind of conversation?
Probably both. I'm completely shut down when people are mad at me because I'm a recovering people pleasing perfectionist. So I like when someone comes at me with anger, I'm always wanting to try and see what I can do to make it better. And so
Yeah.
I think in general, that probably was a huge part of it for me, because anytime someone's mad at me, I want to know why and how I can fix it. So I think that for me, that's just probably a shutdown point in the conversation. Um,
Mm.
so I think that probably was kind of more of the problem for
Yeah, I totally get it. And what about your familial relationships and your close, like, girlfriend, guy friend relationships? Did any of those change or any shifts happening in those dynamics?
I think we're having the conversations about race all the time now. So I think I
Wow.
tell Garrett that he always feels like he's not doing enough in the race conversation. And I can point to our circle of friends and tell him how he's changed each one of them.
Mm,
He's unaware of that, but I think we're able to have those conversations so much more easy now. And because I think they know we're open to having it, and we all are,
mm,
everyone's trying to figure out they want to do the best that they can do, you know, or continue to learn and to grow. And so having the conversations is a great place to start. So I think that's probably changed the most.
mm,
Is that we're able, especially with other couple friends, we're able to have those conversations. Um,
mm,
so I think that that's huge. I think, you know, some family members are more open than other family members to the conversation, but if they are and they know we are, then, you know, it's a great conversation. So, um,
yeah.
I think that it's open for that if that's what it wants to be. But I do think that's probably changed, like dinner conversations and things like that. You know,
Yeah.
it's on the forefront of, I mean, not only like in the news and everything, but it's like people are having the conversation, and I kind of think that awareness is where it starts.
That's a good point. Awareness is where it starts. And spiritually for you, a lot of people that I've talked to, white, black, Indian, Asian, ever since last summer in particular, with all the unrest that was happening, starting with George Floyd, but well, even before that,
Yeah.
I've heard so many people say that, this conversation around race relations has not only changed who I am as a person, but it's literally changed my faith and how I view spirituality. And so I'm curious for you, has there been any awakenings or any spiritual shifts at all in your perception?
Hmm. Okay. So yes and no. I
Hmm.
think so I'm Catholic, but I definitely think Pope Francis is awesome.
Yeah.
He is like he, for me, he's kind of actually maybe like re-brought my faith into the church and what it's there for, like the way that he
Mm,
goes about his life and what he's teaching. So I actually almost feel maybe more aligned that way, with
mm,
following him, and kind of it's like he's just a person who thinks that everyone should be treated kindly and justly. And I don't know. I think that that's been kind of for me, a breath of fresh air. For a long time, I didn't identify. You know, I had a harder time with being Catholic and what that growth would be. But I think spiritually, I think anytime you're putting another group of people down, um, you can't quite possibly be trying to serve and
mm.
to do good work. Um, through God. So you know, I think that that is, I think the idea of those changes, I think are more grounding for me, honestly, to kind of hunker down and really realize, you know, I don't need to do all these other things. Like if we kind of can focus on lifting each other up.
Yeah, lifting each other up. And I think so many people are trying to figure out what are things that they can shift, they can change to
Mhm.
lift other people up, especially, those who, in Isabel Wilkerson's words, who are maybe of the lower caste system.
Correct.
For you, in particular, what are ways in which you are specifically working to do your part and moving this conversation forward and creating change?
All right. So I think for myself, it's kind of a double thing. I think through parenting, through our kids,
Mm,
is part of it. I do
mhm.
think that doing some of like the work just in conversations with people at like work in places where I normally would have absolutely never had these conversations. You know, we can start kind of having those conversations. And I think that that's kind of where I'm at as far as like, you
Mhm.
know, making those changes and becoming educated and reading all the books and trying to do all the things, and passing on the books when you're done with the books. And, you know, saying,
Yeah.
oh, this is interesting. You guys might want to look at this. So I think that's all part of probably where I'm at as far as the change kind of goes. Also giving Garrett the space to do more of the parenting on my end, and letting him do, you know, more of the work that he wants to do, which is also, you know, a commitment for both of us.
Yeah. And I can't say that enough because, I'm in conversation with so many different people where again there's that one person maybe in the relationship who is trying to push the other person towards it.
Mhm.
You know, I don't think enough couples are having these kind of conversations where there is an understanding of how you both want to move in the world and how you want to evolve in your relationship. What do you say to other couples, especially white couples in particular, with how does one begin to have these conversations and how does one open themselves up so that you can move as a collective unit?
Well, first, I would say a lot of grace because it's messy. And I think it's hard to have these
Mm,
conversations. And I think there's a lot of unlearning that probably needs to happen. And I think just even spending the time having conversations about, um, whatever the next topic will be in the news, but sitting and like wrestling with that conversation and knowing
mhm,
that I always kind of for a long time thought Garrett was always right and I didn't have a voice in the conversation to challenge him.
mm,
And I think it's okay. And I think our conversations have gotten better once I realized I can challenge him on his views. And so I think that that's actually been a huge part of the conversation is just giving yourself the openness and the grace that like, okay, we're going to have this conversation. I still love you. Okay. Like, let's go ahead. Let's kind of go through this conversation. And just because I'm questioning you always doesn't mean I don't agree with you, but it also could mean I am curious because I'm having this doubt or I'm having this feeling
mm,
that I'm not sure where I belong here in this conversation, or I don't know that I understand the other side very well. And taking the time to actually break down those conversations. I think for us, it's been easy because unfortunately it's been in the news a lot lately. So every time those kind of happen, we have these kind of more drawn out conversations about it. But it
mhm,
actually helps my perspective quite a bit to keep having the conversations, even though it's changed. I think from where we were to where we are has changed immensely because we've been able to say, okay, we're gonna engage in a tough conversation that's really messy, but we're still here for each other at the end of the conversation. Like we don't necessarily have to agree perfectly, but we both want to continue the conversation about race, and so we need to be able to do that. So I think that that's the bigger thing. I also think
mhm,
that within a couple, you're probably going to always have one person who's driving the train a little bit more than another. And I think just
mm,
being able to have those conversations and letting the person maybe who's not up, pushing things along to show up and be present is actually almost just as
mm.
important because I think for a long time I was really quiet and I wouldn't engage. I would just listen. And so when I started engaging, the conversations improved. So I think that's
Yeah.
important. So don't just keep talking, you have to check in with that other person because I think that's huge in these conversations. And I think that's how you both grow. And I think I've pushed Garrett too a little bit to learn a little bit more or be able to articulate how he's feeling a little bit more than probably prior to that when I was just doing the listening. So, but yeah, I think us agreeing though, like this is an important conversation that we're having and we need to continue to, support each other in that. And it might not be that I'm always in the forefront of it and it might be Garrett doing the work, but it's a commitment that we're making as a family that that's important work.
Yeah, and commitment you're making as a family, and you just hit the nail right on the head. Is we're having these difficult conversations, but it's rooted in love, and so perhaps there's going to be something that I say that may be difficult for you to hear, but is also is rooted in love, and then the actionary piece of it. I think Lindsay, that's a big part that's missing, in these kind of conversations. Like, okay, great, we'll talk, until we're blue in the face, red in the face,
Yeah.
but now, what are the next steps that you're going to take to initiate, whatever you all want to do, as a
Mhm.
family,
Mhm.
and then even to the family piece of it all, being committed to this work as a family. What do you say to other families who not only are trying to figure out how to even start, but like, why is that commitment important to do it together, and especially with your children?
Um, I think if it's not involved in your with your children and with your family, it's probably not going to go anywhere. It's a personal
Mm,
journey instead of a journey of kind of growth and change. I think the change happens generationally. And
mm.
so I think that that's kind of where, I think doing it as a family is important. an example of as far as action and things like that go, we have a friend, a neighbor who, after one of Garrett's Facebook Lives talking about race, went and started a fund for people of color that needed help paying for college. And so, here we are donating money to something that a friend started about that, to be able to give money to people of color to help out with college. So, we're super happy to do those things. And so, kind of the action plan as well as, just the talking. But I totally get you on the talking. The action plan is hard. I think, as you know, you've been
Mm.
working with Garrett. I think that's the hard part for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is I love these kind of conversations. Love what you're doing, where you all are modeling, because you just, as you said, the generational change is really where it's at, and of course the educating of children, and being able to again have these really difficult and hard conversations for you, and where you said, what do you think the world needs most right now?
Hmm. Honestly, I think less judgment.
Hmm.
I think
Okay.
a lot there's so many there's judgments right currently over masks or not masks, vaccine, not vaccine, race. There's all of these judgments out there. And I think without the judgment and more love, I think there's a lot more change that can happen and a lot more unity that can happen. So I think that is probably the biggest thing, kind of the more love, less hate kind of a thing. But I think that is true. I'm pretty sure in the 60s I'd be a hippie, but yeah, like I do think that's probably true. I think that's, the biggest thing, because I think people are just, they always want to be right and they always want to judge the other person. And I just think that as soon as you get into that type of system where you're always putting someone else down, there's never any growth, there's never change, and there's not unity.
Yeah, yeah, there's not unity. And for you, as you're moving forward in this year and the different conversations that you're having, and especially that's taking place, one thing that I know a lot of folks struggle with immensely, and you see all over LinkedIn, is being able to challenge conversations in the workplace and have these conversations in the workplace. What do you say to, other people who are trying to figure out, oh gosh, I don't want to bring this into work, but I cannot avoid what I'm seeing in front of me because I don't want to lose my job. I don't want to be known as that person who is the troublemaker. How do we begin to even begin? We'll sort of have those conversations.
Those are hard. Those
Yeah.
conversations are really hard for work, and I think that they matter. I
Hmm.
think either sticking up for what you believe in or sticking up for yourself in some cases is equally as important to have those conversations, I think. But I think it comes back to that kind of judgment and putting other people down, even though my view might be something different. If I can bring that to the table instead of telling them how all their other things are wrong, or, but how if it's about me or something that I see happening that I don't like, it needs to come from a different place than just I'm right, you're wrong. Because I think when you come to the table with the vulnerability, I think that makes a big difference to say, this isn't right. We need to look at this. We need to make an action plan and we need to change it. And I think that, most places are going to be receptive to that. I mean, that's just something that needs to be addressed. And I think
Mhm.
that it's hard. Workplaces are really
Yeah.
tricky work, where it's like, you kind of know those people that you can have the conversations with, right? Like you kind of
Hmm.
find that out. And then you're not always having it in front of another person. And I think, that's all important, especially, I mean, racism, but like sexism and all of, ageism, even. So, all of that stuff
Yeah.
is happening in a workplace. And so those are all really, really tricky, sensitive subjects because no one wants to be looked at as doing it wrong. And so I
Hmm.
think that's important too, as well as just kind of being able to stand up for yourself. I always just lead mine with an email. I want to have a conversation about X, Y, and Z. So I don't back down. So,
Hmm.
that's how I kind of address that, because I'm always like, oh, I'll chicken out if I just say, oh, I want to talk. I won't address the things I want to address. And so sending an email with an agenda helps me stay on, commit to it. I'm committed.
Yeah. And having a sense of courage,
Yeah,
as
absolutely.
well.
Absolutely.
Yeah. What is one thing that you wish you would have learned or knew about this whole anti-racism journey before engaging it and really being intentional about living it?
Hmm. Probably all of the hurt and damage it's done. I
Mm,
think that probably would be the biggest thing. So I think that's part of the journey. I think, all the other things could have been taught and learned, but I think seeing it play out is totally different and heartbreaking. So, I just think that you just want to become complacent and not see what, you know, the systemic system has done and, to people. And I think that that's just, a hard place to be in. And I think just knowing how many people are hurt or families are having such different conversations than a white family is having, right? So I
hmm
think that that's a big thing that I kind of wish I in a bigger picture would have maybe understood more.
Yeah, yeah. Lindsay, I just want to thank you so much for this time and this conversation. I think definitely from the audience and the listeners and the viewers of this podcast is that these are the kind of conversations I think people want to have with their spouses, want to have with their partners, their mother, their father, their cousins, and coworkers. But I think are too afraid to do it. A lot of times, people just think like the Garretts of the world, who this is their work, this is starting to be what they are known for. We tend to forget there's also a family unit behind that person that's not only supporting them, but they have their own goals, their own aspirations for this work as well. And what you've done is really given us a masterclass on the evolutionary period of what you're going through as an individual, but also how we can make this a conversation as a family unit, a part of our everyday vernacular and not something that is maybe every other family, but it really can be something that you can engage with today.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And any closing thoughts that you have, or do you want to share at all?
Um, I'm good. Thank you for having me. Sorry if I was so nervous.
No, no, no. This is a really great it's a really great conversation. I can see the yin and yang with you and Garrett, and how supportive you are of each other, and how this is going to be what I'm thinking and what I'm feeling, supportive and helpful of other people who are trying to engage this conversation. Lindsay, any books that or anything you want to recommend for children or anything at all before we end our time?
Man, I wish I could run over to Tenley's room. There is like a kid's book to anti-racism. It's like a white book with red writing. Great book.
Okay.
That one's great, and we always do. I mean, obviously, we try to promote girls in our house, and so
Yes.
Rebel Girls storybooks are awesome too. So we do a lot of that.
All right, great.
And
So, listen, listeners, I'll have this information from Lindsay. We'll figure out those titles for the books, and I'll have at the base of the podcast. You can learn more about me by visiting clayswilliams.com, and I'm on all your favorite social media by the handle of at Plan A with Clay. That's at Plan A with Clay. Remember, folks, Clay's with a K. Start having these conversations in your home, in your workplace, and take the lead that Lindsay and Garrett are doing with their families. It really starts there in creating the change your generations really want to have, and not just this idea we actually can't have it in action today. Thanks so much for listening. I look forward to seeing you in our very next episode of Plan A Conversations.